May 9th, 1941. East of Cape Farewell. The Ping in the Grey Sea. May 9th, 1941. North Atlantic, east of Cape Farewell, Greenland. The sea is a slate-colored wilderness under low cloud, the kind of cold that makes metal sting through gloves and turns spray into needles, and HMS Bulldog rides it with the stubborn, wet weight of a tired escort that has been too long at sea. On the bridge, Commander AJB Joe Baker Creswell watches the convoy's columns fade in and out of drizzle. Merchantmen trudging westward, smoke low, wakes smeared by wind. While below, the Aztec hut lives in a world of headphones and tension, listening for the one sound that means death is moving under the keel. Then it comes, a faint, precise return. Ping. Then the ghost of a shape in the operator's mind, too steady to be a whale, too purposeful to ignore. The corvette HMS Aubritia has already sighted what looks like a periscope cutting the surface, a thin betrayal of black against grey. And now the escorts converge like hounds. The order snaps down the voice pipe, and Bulldog heels as she turns hard, bows punching into the swell. You can feel the ship shudder as the screws bite and the whole destroyer commits to the hunt. Somewhere out there, beneath this brutal water, Kapitän Lieutenant Fritz Julius Lemp sits inside U-110's steel cylinder, listening to the world become hostile. Hydrophone reports, the rising whine of propellers overhead, the sense of pressure tightening around him, as if the ocean itself has joined the Royal Navy. A depth charge pattern detonates with a dull, concussive thump that you don't hear so much as absorb in your bones. On Bulldog, the blast kicks a tremor through the deck plates, and men glance at each other with that quick, hard look that says, "Did we get him?" Then another set of explosions rolls through the sea, closer, more violent, and the convoy's distant merchantmen seem to shrink away as if trying not to witness what's happening. Inside U-110, lights flicker, gauges dance, and the hull answers with groans that sound like an animal being forced to the surface. Men grab for handholds, boots slip in spilled condensation, and the air tastes of diesel, sweat, and fear. Lemp knows the drill: crash dive, evade, stay quiet, but the shockwaves keep coming, and damage has a way of turning doctrine into improvisation. Aboard Bulldog, the sea is suddenly littered with hints: oil sheen, bubbles, debris, signs that the U-boat is wounded, and Baker Creswell's mind races through the grim arithmetic. If it stays down, it can still kill. If it comes up, you have seconds to prevent it from scuttling. Then, like a breaching whale, but uglier and far more dangerous, U-110 erupts through the surface in a rush of foaming water, her conning tower slick and black, men scrambling onto the deck, some reaching for the gun, some just blinking in the daylight they didn't expect to see. Bulldog's guns are already trained. The first shells crack out with savage urgency. Water spouts leap beside the submarine, and you can see the instant Lemp realizes the trap has closed. Ramming threat, gunfire, no time to destroy what cannot be allowed to fall into enemy hands. Orders are shouted on the U-boat, hatches thrown open, men spilling into the sea, and for a heartbeat the impossible hangs in the air. A German submarine still afloat, crew abandoning her in the middle of the Atlantic, while a British destroyer slows, hesitates, because someone on Bulldog is thinking a thought too dangerous to say aloud. What if we board her? And what if the thing we find inside changes the war? The moment U-110 breaks the surface, everything becomes frantic and strangely quiet at the same time. Guns firing, then abruptly stopping as Baker Creswell realizes the submarine isn't slipping under quickly enough. She's damaged, listing slightly, but still afloat. And that single fact opens a door that almost never stays open in this war. Through binoculars, Bulldog's bridge watches German sailors in dark leather and soaked wool clinging to wreckage and each other, some with hands up, some fighting the sea, their faces shocked to be alive and terrified of what they've left behind. Somewhere among them, Kapitän-Leutnant Fritz Julius Lemp is still trying to force the end he knows is required. Scuttle, destroy, deny. Because if a U-boat is captured intact, it's not just a ship lost, it's a secret surrendered. And in 1941, the Kriegsmarine's greatest secret isn't a torpedo, it's information. But the sea is messy, the damage is worse than planned. The crew has been driven out by gunfire and depth charges, and abandonment has happened too fast for method. Baker Cresswell's voice cuts across the bridge. A boarding party. It's a gamble with a thin margin because a submarine can be a trap even when it looks dead. Charges, valves open, batteries gassing chlorine, the constant risk that she'll suddenly settle and take your men with her. Yet the prize is too rare. A whaler is swung out, ropes squealing, and the boarding party climbs down into the small boat with weapons slung and faces set. Sub-Lieutenant David Balm among them, young enough to look like he should still be at training, steady enough to climb into hell without hesitation. The whaler's engine chatters as it pushes through chop toward the black hull, spray soaking men as they look up at the conning tower rising like a cliff, the metal slick with oil and seawater. Around them, German survivors call out, some pleading, some silent, and the British sailors on Bulldog begin hauling them aboard, because you cannot leave men to drown, even if they wore the enemy's uniform a minute ago. That rescue is a distraction and a mercy at once. It keeps German eyes off the submarine's hatches, and it buys Balme seconds. The whaler bumps against U-110's side with a dull thud, hands grabbing at railings and any projection that will hold. Balme and his men scramble up the hull, boots sliding, fingers numb, hearts hammering as they reach the deck and find it eerily empty. No shouting crew, no muzzle flashes, just the wind and the slap of waves and the smell of diesel and burned insulation. The hatch is open. That is the most terrifying detail of all, because an open hatch can mean haste or an invitation. Balmy peers down into the darkness, pistol ready, and drops into the conning tower, his men following, the metal ladder cold as ice. Inside, the air is thick and sour. Diesel fumes, sweat, damp electrics, and the boat feels alive in the worst way, creaking and settling with each swell. Water sloshes somewhere below. Gauges tremble. A valve hisses faintly. Balmy moves by instinct and training. Quick checks, short commands, no wasted motion, because if scuttling charges are ticking or sea valves are open, they have minutes at best. They find papers, charts, signal logs, then more, coded tables, booklets that look ordinary until you understand what they are. In a cramped compartment, half lit by a dim bulb that flickers like a dying candle, Balmy's hand touches a machine. Wooden case, metal rotors, a keyboard that shouldn't be here on a warship unless war itself has become mathematics. An enigma. For a second, the boarding party simply stares, not because they know exactly what it will mean in London, but because they can feel the weight of it. This is the enemy's voice made physical. Above deck, the sea continues to punish the hull, and Bulldog's bridge watches the submarine with the same tension you'd give a live mine. Below, Balmy starts grabbing what he can: Enigma, code books, signals material, while another man wrestles with valves and damage control, trying to keep U-110 from slipping away beneath them. Somewhere in the grey Atlantic, Lemp's war ends in confusion and water. Somewhere in this steel corridor, a different war begins. The silent one, fought with intercepted messages, where a single captured machine can condemn ships you'll never see to death, or save them. Balmy's boots splash in the dim corridor as the submarine rolls under him, the whole steel belly of U-110 breathing with the swell, and every instinct in the boarding party screams that they are standing inside a sinking coffin. Yet Balmy forces his voice calm, because panic wastes oxygen and time is the one thing the Atlantic never gives back. He moves fast through compartments lit by flickering bulbs, grabbing anything that looks like communications, signal logs, code tables, booklets with neat German print. Because even if you don't fully understand what you're holding, you can feel that it's valuable in the way it's guarded, in the way it's stored, in the way the boat's routines depend on it. A sailor shoves papers into a bag until the bag is heavy and awkward, and another man wrestles the Enigma machine free like he's stealing a safe from a burning house. Somewhere deeper, a hiss grows louder, sea water finding a path. So Balmy snaps orders to check valves and shut what can be shut. Because a captured U-boat isn't just a trophy, it's a floating intelligence archive. And if she goes down now, the ocean will erase the evidence for the Germans and the British both. The smell changes as they move, diesel to acid to something sharp and choking that makes men blink hard. U-boat batteries are unforgiving, and everyone knows that seawater mixing with them can release poisonous gas, turning a compartment into a trap you can't smell until it's too late. Balmy doesn't linger. He takes what he can and pushes back toward the conning tower with the urgency of a man who understands he's carrying more than paper. He's carrying the enemy's language. Up top, Bulldog's deck is a chaos of rescue. German survivors dragged aboard, shivering, coughing out salt water, some staring at the submarine with haunted disbelief as if expecting her to explode, while British sailors keep their faces unreadable, because the most important part of this operation is what the Germans must not realize, that their boat wasn't simply lost, it was entered, searched, and stripped. Orders travel quickly. No triumph, no announcements, no talk. If Berlin learns an Enigma machine and code material have been captured, the Germans will change procedures, replace books, tighten protocols, and the prize will evaporate before it reaches the people who can use it. So the rescue is conducted like any other, the prisoners handled like any other, and the submarine is treated not as a miracle, but as a damaged hulk, because secrecy is the real cargo. Then the next gamble begins. Towing. Lines are passed, hawsers strain, Bulldog and other escorts try to take U-110 in hand, and for a moment it seems possible, absurdly possible, that the submarine might be brought in as a physical prize. But the Atlantic is already collecting its payment. U-110's bow sits low. She shudders with each wave. Water works through the damage and through whatever scuttling measures were started in the panic. The tow line jerks, goes slack, tightens again, and the submarine begins to settle with the slow inevitability of iron surrendering to the sea. Men on Bulldog watch, jaws clenched, as the black hull dips lower. Balmer, now back on the destroyer, stares at the wet bags and the captured machine and realizes the truth of the moment. The submarine may be lost, the captain may be gone, but the secret has been taken. And as U-110 finally slips beneath the grey surface, leaving only oil sheen and debris, the boarding party understands they have not just survived a battle. They have stolen a key to a hidden war, one that will be fought in quiet rooms far from this freezing water, where the fate of convoys will be decided by whether the enemy ever realizes what was lost in these few minutes below deck. The sea closes over U-110 with a final, indifferent swallow, and for a moment, the only proof she ever existed is the slick rainbow of diesel on the surface and the cold weight of what Balmy's men have piled on Bulldog's deck. Soaked satchels, damp booklets, metal boxes, and that wooden-cased machine with keys like a typewriter and rotors like a locked throat. The boarding party doesn't cheer because Baker Cresswell understands the paradox of the moment. The victory is real, only if nobody knows it happened. On Bulldog, the captured Germans are treated like ordinary survivors. Blankets, hot drinks, medical checks. Because any hint of excitement, any extra attention paid to the submarine, might tell the prisoners that something far worse than capture has occurred. Men who have lived by procedure can sense when procedure changes, and the Kriegsmarine trains its crews to destroy secrets, so the British act bored, businesslike, almost impatient, as if the entire episode has been an inconvenient rescue in bad weather. Below deck, Balmy is pulled into a cramped space to make a quick, urgent inventory while the destroyer pitches, and the items are handled with an almost religious caution. Signal books with tidy German headings, lists of abbreviations that mean nothing to a sailor until you realize they are shortcuts for U-boat reports, weather code sheets that compress the ocean into a few symbols, and the Enigma machine itself, still smelling of oil and metal, still wet in places, as if the Atlantic tried to claim it and failed. Someone produces towels and rags. Salt water is wiped away. Papers are separated so the ink won't bleed. A petty officer holds a booklet near a lamp to dry it, hands trembling slightly not from cold, but from the sense that a single ruined page could mean a convoy lost months from now. Baker Cresswell sends signals that are careful with wording because even friendly radio traffic can be overheard, and the escort group continues its duty as if nothing extraordinary has occurred, sliding back into the grey routine of convoy protection while the true cargo stays out of sight, guarded not by guns, but by silence. On shore, in offices where men speak softly and write notes they immediately lock away, naval intelligence begins moving the prize like contraband, not for display, not for headlines, but for a destination that does not look like war at all. Bletchley Park, a quiet estate where mathematicians, linguists, and wrens fight the Atlantic battle with pencil marks and punched paper. The handover happens fast and without ceremony, sealed containers, trusted couriers, routes chosen to minimize eyes. And when the material arrives, it does not arrive as a trophy, but as a lifeline. In rooms that smell of tea and warm machinery, specialists open the packages and their faces tighten, because they know what they're seeing and what it might unlock. The Enigma, the codebooks, the signal procedures, together they are a snapshot of how U-boats speak to each other and to command, how they report convoy sightings, how they receive orders to form wolf packs, how they transmit in compressed bursts meant to evade direction finding. And the people at Bletchley understand a cruel truth that sailors at sea can only sense. If you can read the enemy's messages, you can steer around his teeth. But the advantage is fragile. If Berlin suspects an Enigma compromise, procedures will change overnight, keys replaced, books withdrawn, and the door will slam shut. So the Admiralty's secrecy becomes its own battle, a campaign of deliberate understatement, of keeping prisoners in the dark, of making U-110's fate look like any other kill in the Atlantic. And in the cold wake of May 9th, 1941, while the convoy plods onward and the ocean keeps its count, the war's loudest front, the ships and torpedoes and depth charges, briefly yields to the quietest front of all. The race to exploit what was captured before the enemy realizes what was truly lost, when a boarding party climbed down into a half-sinking submarine and found the means to hear the Kriegsmarine speak. The packages arrive without drama, because drama is the one luxury British intelligence cannot afford. And at Bletchley Park, the men and women who carry them through corridors do it with the same careful calm you'd use for explosives. Wet paper wrapped in oilcloth, salt-stained booklets, a wooden-cased naval Enigma that looks almost harmless until you remember what it has been saying to the Atlantic. In Hut 8, where the naval problem lives like a permanent headache, the room is warm with bodies and machines, chalk dust on fingers, teacups cooling untouched, and the low mechanical mutter of equipment that never really sleeps. A duty officer takes the satchel, closes the door, and suddenly the air changes. Less like an office, more like a surgery, where everyone knows the patient might not survive the night. Someone opens the bundle and spreads the documents on a table under a lamp. The Kurd Signal codebook that compresses U-boat messages into brief groups, and other setting material that, if it's what it appears to be, can turn yesterday's indecipherable intercepts into plain German sentences. The people around the table don't cheer. They lean closer, eyes narrowing, because the prize isn't the book itself. It's what the book lets you do when paired with the day's intercepted traffic and the relentless logic of the bomb runs. The atmosphere is almost violent in its quiet intensity. Pencils scratching, pages turned carefully so damp corners don't tear, Voices kept low even though the war is far away, because secrecy here is not a policy, it's survival. A senior codebreaker points to a heading, then to a column of groups, and you can see the moment comprehension spreads through the room like a current. If those groups match what the intercept stations have been recording, then the U-boat voice that has been taunting the Admiralty in cipher may finally be made readable on demand. A wren brings in a fresh stack of intercept sheets, another pins a timeline to a board, and suddenly it becomes less about what was captured on May 9th and more about what can be read on May 10, May 11th, and the days after, because every hour you can read is an hour you can reroute a convoy away from a wolf pack's teeth. In another room, someone drafts instructions with maddening restraint. The Admiralty must be told, but not in a way that changes behavior so obviously that Germany suspects compromise. No sudden, miraculous evasions. No patterns that scream, "We are inside your messages." The Enigma machine itself is set down like a loaded pistol. Rotors clicked gently as if loud sounds might wake the enemy across the sea, and an operator tests the captured material against the day's key problem with the same careful patience as a man picking a lock while footsteps approach in the hallway. When the first lines finally begin to resolve, when a fragment of naval German emerges from what had been meaningless groups, the room doesn't erupt. It goes still, almost reverent, because everyone understands what that means in human terms. Fewer ships burning at night, fewer men in freezing water, fewer unanswered signals fading into static. Outside, convoys continue to crawl through the Atlantic storm belt, escorts still dropping depth charges into grey seas, sailors still dying without ever knowing a quiet room in Buckinghamshire is now fighting for them. Inside Hut 8, the war turns a corner so sharply and so silently that the only sound is paper, pencil, and the soft, relentless decision to keep the secret. Because if Berlin ever realizes what was taken from U-110, the door will slam and the Atlantic will go dark again. The first time the new advantage is used, it doesn't feel like a triumph at Bletchley Park. It feels like a crime you're trying not to get caught committing, because the moment you can read the enemy, you must also learn to pretend you can't. In London, at the Admiralty's Western Approaches desks, officers lean over a grey chart covered in pencil lines and greasy fingerprints, and the Atlantic is reduced to symbols, convoy codes, escort call signs, reported U-boat positions, while a quiet message arrives that cannot be explained to most of the men who must act on it. A staff officer reads it once, then again, then folds it carefully, as if the paper itself is radioactive, because it isn't intelligence in the normal sense. It's a glimpse into the Kriegsmarine's intentions, the kind of knowledge that can save ships, but also betray its source if used too boldly. Somewhere out at sea, a convoy commodore on a weary merchantman's bridge watches the horizon and thinks the ocean looks the same as it did yesterday, grey, endless, indifferent, until an escort destroyer flashes a signal lamp order that makes no immediate sense: alter course. There's no spotted periscope, no aircraft report, no fresh contact on ASTIC, just a change in heading delivered with the clipped certainty of naval routine. The Commodore frowns, looks at his navigator, and complies. Because in wartime you obey, but in his gut, he wonders what the escorts know that he doesn't. The ships turn slowly, columns bending like a steel snake, wakes crossing and reforming, and to the men on deck it looks like nothing more than another weary adjustment to weather and routing. But beneath the surface of this decision is a fragile choreography. At Bletchley, codebreakers have seen the shape of a wolf pack forming, U-boats converging on a rendezvous point with the cold precision of predators obeying a whistle, and the Admiralty has decided to slide the convoy's path away from the trap, just far enough, just early enough, without making it look like the British have peered directly into German orders. The real fight now is in restraint. Sometimes you must let a convoy keep its course because the diversion would be too suspicious. Sometimes you must route it only slightly, as if avoiding bad weather. Sometimes you must discover a U-boat through an aerial patrol that is quietly sent to confirm what you already know. so that the official story remains believable. In those rooms, men begin speaking in a new, careful language, one that never says why, only what. Recommend convoy shift, increase escort screen, air patrol requested. Each phrase an effort to turn omniscience into plausible caution. Out in the Atlantic, a U-boat commander peers through his periscope at dawn and sees nothing where his radio promised fat targets should be. He reports empty ocean, adjusts, curses the fickleness of war, never imagining that the enemy has heard his own fleet speaking. And on the British escort bridge, a young officer watches the merchant columns plod on and feels a quiet satisfaction he can't share, because if he knew the truth, he would be tempted to act too confidently, and confidence is what would give the secret away. The irony is that no single ship's crew can feel ultra. They only feel that sometimes the ocean seems less murderous than it was a month ago, that sometimes they pass through a stretch of water where they expected death and find only waves, and they credit luck or escort discipline or God. In reality, the captured machine and soaked booklets from U-110 have begun to bend the Atlantic's probabilities, not by magic, but by making the enemy's moves visible, provided Britain can keep the greatest theft of the sea war hidden from the men who lost it. The secret's most dangerous moment isn't in Hut 8 or on the chart tables. It's on the wet, crowded deck of Bulldog, where German survivors shiver under borrowed blankets and look back toward the empty patch of sea that swallowed their boat, because men who served on U-boats are trained to think in procedures, and procedures leave fingerprints. If any prisoner becomes convinced that U-110 was boarded, that the cipher material was taken, then the warning could travel. Through interrogation, through coded hints, through the smallest human slip, back to a command system that knows exactly what to do when Enigma is threatened. Baker Cresswell keeps his ship's tone deliberately flat, almost irritated, as if the entire episode was an annoyance that interrupted escort duty, and he leans hard on routine. Names, ranks, quick medical attention, no excited questions about codebooks, no obvious guarding of the salvaged bags, nothing that tells a soaked sailor on the deck that the British have just stumbled into the Kriegsmarine's throat. Down below, Balmer's boarding party is separated and quietly debriefed with the same discipline. What did you see? What did you touch? What did you remove? What valves did you close? Then instructed in the one rule that matters more than medals. You do not talk about what you found. Not to other ships, not to other crews, not in letters home, not even in a canteen after too much rum, because the war is full of people who talk without meaning to, and somewhere among them are people who listen for a living. The story the Germans are allowed to believe is simple and ugly. Their submarine was forced up, the crew abandoned, she sank, end of event. The Admiralty helps that story along by controlling the paper trail, stamping reports with careful wording, and letting the operational narrative remain exactly what it looks like from the outside. A hard-fought escort action, a damaged U-boat lost at sea. Even the fate of Kapitän Leutnant Fritz Julius Lemp becomes part of the fog. He does not come aboard as a prisoner, and the survivors' confusion about when and how he vanished only strengthens the idea that the incident ended in chaos, not capture. Chaos is believable, and believability is armor. Meanwhile, the British face another quiet hazard, their own hunger to exploit the advantage too quickly. At Western approaches, officers who never met a codebreaker are given directions without explanations, and the lack of explanation is intentional. It keeps behavior natural, keeps the pattern of British choices messy enough to look like seamanship rather than omniscience. When a convoy is diverted, the official justification is weather, or a reconnaissance report, or an estimated U-boat concentration based on direction finding, anything that feels like the normal intelligence fog of war. Sometimes an aircraft is sent to discover a submarine precisely where Bletchley already knows it is, so the paper record reads like good patrol work instead of stolen foresight. And on the German side, the emptiness is its own deception. U-boat commanders report missed contacts, blame bad luck, blame escort tactics, blame the Atlantic, and higher headquarters responds by adjusting patrol lines and procedures without ever reaching the terrifying conclusion that the enemy might be reading orders. In those first critical weeks, that blindness is everything. The British don't need Berlin to remain ignorant forever. They only need it long enough to turn a handful of soaked booklets and one captured machine into a stream of readable traffic. And each day of silence from the Germans is another day convoys can be nudged away from death without anyone aboard them ever knowing why. In the days that follow, the sea war keeps its usual face: storms, radio static, the long grind of escort duty. But beneath that surface, something has changed. And the first people to feel it are the men who don't know why they're feeling it. Out in the Atlantic, a U-boat commander rises at periscope depth in the weak, grey light and scans the horizon exactly where he's been told targets will appear because BDU signals have been confident: course, speed, expected time of interception, yet the sea offers nothing but swell and cloud and the distant illusion of smoke that vanishes when he blinks. He reports no contact, adjusts his patrol line, and tells himself the convoy must have turned early, or the escort must have driven it wide, or the ocean is playing tricks again because the alternative is unthinkable, that somewhere in England the enemy is reading his own orders. In Lorient and Kiel, in offices where Dönitz's staff pins coloured markers to charts, the reports pile up: missed opportunities, convoys that seem to slip away, wolf packs arriving a few hours late to empty water, and the staff responds with what war teaches every headquarters to do: tweak the tactics, alter the patrol lines, demand sharper reporting, blame weather, blame the enemy's improving escort screens. The Kriegsmarine's culture is methodical, almost mathematical, and that very method becomes its blindfold. If you believe your cipher is secure, then the enemy's luck must be explained by surface causes. Meanwhile, in Britain, the advantage is handled like nitroglycerin. At western approaches, convoy routing becomes a performance of plausible uncertainty. Divert just enough, and never in a way that looks like certainty. Justify the change with a DF fix, an air patrol or a weather front, then quietly watch the U-boat concentration pass behind the convoy's stern like a shadow that never reaches it. In Hut 8, codebreakers are no longer chasing a single miracle. They are racing the enemy's routine, because each day they can read is a day they can map patrol lines, anticipate rendezvous points, identify which boats are where, and help escorts shape the battlefield before the first torpedo is even fired. And out at sea, the human difference shows up in small, almost invisible moments. A merchant sailor who makes it to Liverpool without hearing the scream of a torpedo track. An escort commander who spends a night on full alert and then watches dawn arrive with no burning ships behind him. A convoy commodore who curses yet another course change and then, weeks later, learns nothing at all, only that he's alive. The cruel irony is that the more effective the secret becomes, the more disciplined Britain must be in pretending it doesn't exist. There are times when a convoy cannot be saved, because saving it would save too many, too obviously. And so the men in warm rooms must sometimes let the sea take a ship to keep the door open for hundreds more. Far away from the charts and ciphers, that restraint feels like cold policy. In truth, it is strategy sharpened to a moral edge. And in the German submarine pens, where crews drink and boast and grieve in equal measure, the story of U-110 fades into the background noise of losses. Another boat gone, another captain not returning, while the real loss, the one that will doom boats you haven't even launched yet, sits hidden in Britain's hands, exploited quietly, protected obsessively, and never spoken of aloud. For the German submarine service, doom rarely arrives as a single dramatic explosion. More often it arrives as a slow shift in probability, the sense that the ocean is turning hostile in ways you cannot explain. And if you could place Captain Lieutenant Fritz Julius Lemp's last clear thoughts alongside what happens next, you would see the cruel symmetry. He fought the visible war of depth charges and gunfire, and he lost an invisible war without ever knowing it existed. Lemp's fate is sealed in the confusion of that May morning, forced to the surface, trying to scuttle, watching his crew abandon ship too fast and too scattered to complete every denial procedure. And in that confusion, a British boarding party touches the one thing that cannot be touched, the Kriegsmarine's secure voice. Lemp's training would have told him exactly what the loss of an Enigma machine and code material could mean. Convoys found before they are seen, wolf packs diverted into emptiness, orders anticipated, boats hunted, and if he had known for certain that the machine and books were taken, his dread would have been absolute, because in submarine war, secrecy is armor thicker than steel. But Berlin does not know. The prisoners do not know. The official story remains a simple one. U-110 sank, and with it, the secrets. That is the tragedy's core. The captain who tried to deny the enemy the prize dies in a world where his superiors believe he succeeded, while the enemy quietly builds an advantage from what he failed to destroy. Over the following months, the Atlantic becomes a different kind of battlefield. Still brutal, still deadly, but increasingly shaped by information. The Allies do not win overnight. Ships still burn, sailors still freeze, U-boats still strike and vanish, yet the pattern begins to tilt, not always visibly, but steadily, as convoys are routed with an uncanny instinct and wolf packs arrive late, and escorts seem to be waiting in waters where the Germans expected surprise. In headquarters ashore, German officers demand explanations that never quite satisfy. Enemy direction finding improving, air coverage increasing, convoys zigzagging more effectively. All true in parts, none sufficient to explain the emptiness that keeps appearing on the horizon. Meanwhile, Britain continues the hardest discipline of all, selective use, making sure the Germans can attribute British success to many causes rather than one catastrophic compromise. In that sense, the U-boat captain's doom becomes a collective doom that spreads through the force like a slow poison. Each patrol conducted under the assumption of secure communication, each message sent with confidence, each rendezvous ordered with the belief that only German eyes will read it, while an unseen reader in England takes notes. If you're standing on a U-boat bridge at night, wind cutting your face, watching the Black Sea for the pale smudge of a convoy, you never imagine that the convoy might already have turned away hours ago because someone read your own signal. You only feel the frustration, the doubt, and the tightening pressure from commanders who expect results. And that pressure drives boats to stay longer, to take bigger risks, to surface more often, to chase contacts harder. Exactly the behavior that makes them easier to kill once the Allies' broader advantage grows. Lemp's story, then, is not just about a submarine captured and a machine found. It is about the moment the Battle of the Atlantic begins to include a silent weapon capable of turning enemy certainty into empty sea, and when that weapon is kept secret, it becomes more lethal. With each day, Berlin remains blind. In the history books, it's tempting to imagine the capture of U-110's Enigma materials as an instant switch that flips the Atlantic from darkness to daylight. But in reality, it is more frightening and more human than that. A small group of wet sailors, standing on a destroyer's rolling deck, happened to seize a fragile advantage, and then an entire system of intelligence, naval command, and disciplined silence had to carry that advantage forward without letting the enemy notice. The real miracle is not only that Balmy's boarding party climbed into a half-sinking submarine and found the Kriegsmarine's voice in physical form. It's that the British then used it carefully enough, subtly enough, that German Naval Command did not immediately rip up its procedures and slam the door shut. Bletchley Park turned the captured codebooks and Enigma insight into readable traffic. The Admiralty turned readable traffic into altered convoy routes and strengthened escort screens. And out at sea, men who never heard the word Enigma simply lived through nights they might otherwise have died in. Yet every use carried risk. Save too many ships too cleanly, and the Germans grow suspicious. Act with too much precision, and the pattern becomes obvious. Overplay the hand, and the enemy changes keys, books, habits, and the Atlantic goes dark again. So the Enigma prize demanded a kind of moral and operational patience that feels almost unbearable. Sometimes you had to corroborate what you already knew with a chance sighting. Sometimes you had to let other sources take the credit. Sometimes you had to accept losses to keep the secret alive for future convoys. This is the hidden cost of intelligence warfare. Victory measured not only in what you do, but in what you deliberately avoid doing. For the Germans, U-110 remained one loss among many. For the Allies, it became a quiet turning point that helped transform the U-boat campaign from a terrifying hunter's game into a contest the submarines could not win indefinitely, because the enemy's strongest weapon, stealth, was gradually being eroded by information. And if you return in your mind to that grey morning on May 9th, 1941, spray whipping across Bulldog's deck, German survivors coughing salt water, Balmer's men hauling dripping booklets and a wooden-cased machine up into the light, you can see the whole war at sea in miniature. Brutality, chance, courage, and secrecy woven together. The U-boat captain's doom wasn't only the depth charges or the gunfire that forced him up. It was the moment a boarding party touched the one thing he could not protect in time, and the moment Britain proved it could keep that theft quiet long enough to make it matter.